talk about you talk about empathy and perspective and building relationships as a leader. But I look at a leader like Steve Jobs, who's known for his hostile attitude toward people. Isn't that being default aggressive like you talk about? If I'm more naturally that type of leader, should I go with it? If it worked for Steve Jobs, shouldn't it work for me?
So that's a good question. And I haven't actually read the book about Steve Jobs, and I think there's probably more than one, but there's one that's real popular, real thick, and someone gave it to me, and I have it, and I will someday, but I haven't read it yet, and I've heard it's really good and all that. And that being said, I've heard the same things about, Steve Jobs' leadership style. He was real tyrannical, and I pulled a couple things here just from, here we go. In his book about Jobs' time at Next and Return to Apple, The Second Coming of Steve Jobs, Alan Deutschman described Jobs' rough treatment of his underlings. He would praise, this is a quote, he would praise and inspire them, often in very creative ways, but he would also resort to intimidating, goading, berating, belittling, and even humiliating them. So, and then there's another article by Ronald Reggio, who's a PhD in psychology, and the article came from Psychology Today, and it says he was obsessively controlling and given to fits of rage, throwing tantrums and yelling at employees and board members. He could tear down someone's ideas or the person himself in a public display. Some have said he took credit for others' ideas, and his confidence led to a sort of over-the-top arrogance. So the guy's kind of tyrannical. One time when they were putting together the Mobile Me application and it wasn't working well, and Jobs told the team that was putting it together, when it wasn't working, you've tarnished Apple's reputation. You should hate each other for having let each other down. So first of all, let's look at the fact, and you've heard me say this before, that people's strengths are their weaknesses and their weaknesses can be their strengths. So in Steve Jobs' case, obviously some of this stuff, some of his weaknesses that we're talking about here were also strengths, because he was totally beyond driven, right? He was completely obsessed with doing good and all that. And he pressed toward his vision extremely hard. He was relentless in trying to make things happen. And again, those are very positive characteristics. If you got someone that's really driven and they're driven to the point of almost being obsessed, and you take that, and those are kind of good characteristics. But when they go too far, this is why it's dichotomy. This is a balance of leadership, right? When you go too far, you become a tyrannical leader, which is not good. It's not good for a team, and a team that is subjected to that kind of attitude will not perform as well as a unified team, period. So the guy was clearly hostile, and at the same time, clearly, he was one of the most successful business leaders in history, right? So would you look at him and say, okay, well, maybe I should be that way. Maybe I should be a tyrannical leader. And I would say to that, no. You do not get to do that. And here's why. Let's look at some other characteristics that Steve Jobs had. First of all, he was perhaps the foremost technological visionary in the history of the world. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he had a vision of technology that very few people in the history in the world have had. And I will go a little bit more narrow. I think he understood things on another level when it came to technology, the part of how human beings would interact with technology. That's the part that I think he really had just incredible vision for. He realized, like, oh, these people will want a computer in their house, and they'll want it to reflect the way they live, and they're going to want music in their pocket, and they're going to want all of their music in their pocket, and they're going to want a phone that can do, he had this vision of how people would interact with technology that I don't think too many people had. So that's number one. Number two, he had a phenomenal feel for design. Right, for design and how to merge form and function together in an aesthetically pleasing and oftentimes stunning way. right? If you look at the design, and that's uncommon, especially for someone to have that feel for design and still have a massively technical background, right? So that again, we're making a person that's like 1% of 1% of 1% already. On top of that, he got into his business at the right time, in the right place. He had the right background. On top of that, the guy could speak well. The guy was very articulate, right? He was very articulate with his vision. If you watch his keynote speeches that he would give at the whatever it is when they have the Apple convention, what's that thing called?
The Apple convention.
Yeah, they have that thing. Well, he'd get up on stage and he'd talk about stuff, and he would articulate that, and he would do it with real clarity, and he was very convincing, and he was very captivating. And people were, they'd say Apple's a cult.
Yeah.
They'd follow that guy. So he had all those skills, those world-class skills. And I'm not using that term lightly. I'm talking world-class skills. And then all those world-class skills are combined together into one package, one human being. And there you got Steve Jobs. So he's got all those advantages. And then on top of that, he's had some luck along the way, right? He had some luck in his timing and his upbringing and the exposures that he got, and being exposed to computer programming and those things back in the day was rare, and he got lucky in having that unfold for him. So he had all these things going for him that helped propel him and his company to the top. So now, if you're thinking maybe you should use his leadership style, the questions that you should ask yourself is: are you a 1 in a billion technological visionary or visionary of any kind? The answer to that is likely no. And if you think it's yes, maybe you should check your ego a little bit. Then you have to ask yourself, do you have an eye for design, an artistic eye for design like Da Vinci or Michelangelo? If you have that, you probably don't. If you think you have that, maybe you should check your ego again. Are you a gifted speaker and storyteller, and can you convey your vision with total clarity to big, giant groups, broad groups of people? And if you think you can do that, again, you should check your ego. Can you count on luck, or do you want to count on luck to close the gaps in some of those other areas? So if you could do all those things, if you answered yes 100% to all those questions, then okay, maybe you can get away with being a kind of leader that Steve Jobs was. But if you're a normal person, if you're a normal human being, then maybe you should try and be a good leader. And maybe you should be a leader that builds relationships and forms cohesive teams and coalitions that help you drive your mission forward despite the ups and downs of whatever business you're in. So that's it. Steve Jobs had a lot of other things that made him successful.
Yeah.
And leadership. And I'm going to eventually read the book, but he clearly had some people around him that utilized that skill, the skills that he did have, and helped move him forward, right? Other people at the company, other people early in Apple saw that, hey, you know what? This guy, he might be a little bit hard to deal with, but he's got some things that we won't find anywhere else. So let's prop him up and let's move forward.
Yeah.
And that's the way it works.
Yeah. I think they call that survivorship bias, where like you see
a successful guy and you go,
yeah, and you're like, yeah, he did it that way, so let's do it that way. But yeah, you kind of don't see all the other factors or whatever. Almost like if you really think about it, if Steve Jobs were to be like in these tyrannical ways or whatever, if he were to be less like that, maybe there would be more success. You see what I'm saying? But he was so strong in these other areas that it kind of like mitigated the effects.
You know, there's businesses that are successful because they're a successful business model. Yeah. And they have really bad leadership.
Yeah, and even that can't mess it up, kind of thing.
Even the bad leadership doesn't. It's the model is so good.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit contrary because, I always say leadership's the most important thing on the battlefield. But in the business world, if you have a phenomenal idea, then you can be successful on that idea alone. Now that is a unicorn. That is one of those rare things where you have something that's that incredibly different and stands out from the crowd so much that it's going to be successful no matter what.
Yeah.
You know, when the early gyms, MMA type gyms, if you had one, you were successful. Didn't matter what kind of leader you were, because you had it.
Yeah.
And now there's competition. If you don't have good leadership and you're not putting forth a good product amongst all the competitors, you're gonna have problems.
Yeah.
You're gonna have problems with it.
Yeah, and the more I kind of listen to you and Leif, the more I realize that even then, it's almost like you have to have a minimum level of leadership. Like, you don't have to be perfect if you have one of these situations where the product of the business model is so good. Yeah. But still, even your leadership can mess that up.
Oh, yeah. You can absolutely destroy it.
Yeah, like you're in a situation where, like, now no one wants to work for you. Now what? Oh, yeah, good. Nice MMA gym. You don't have any. You got to work there.
Yeah.
You know, the whole time. And you can't, so it's going to kind of fall apart after a while. So maybe, like, in the beginning, it'd be good, but it'll fall apart because of your lack of leadership.
For sure.
Or something.
And you can see that. I mean, who's the guy that just got removed from Uber? I'd have to go into I'd have to really drill down on it, but the CEO of Uber got removed.
Yeah.
And, the business model's awesome.
Yeah.
And they still removed the CEO. Why? Because there's issues there.
Yeah.
And so, well, it's a great business model, but we still need good leadership.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm basically confirming what you just said. The good business model will get you to a certain level, but then to get to the next level, you're gonna need leadership, and that's why leadership's the most important thing on the battlefield.
Yeah, man. So what? The moral: don't necessarily be tyrannical.
No, in fact, don't be
straight up
tyrannical.
Yeah.
Don't be. And I'm not saying that there's not times where you have to have a little tyrannical flair, because there may be times where you need to flare up a little bit.
Yeah.
But it should be rare.
Yeah.
It should be rare. The problem is it becomes a crutch for people, and then they just continue to do it more and more and more and more, and then it doesn't work.
It's kind of like drugs too, right? When you flare up on someone. And you win or whatever, you kind of like it.
It worked.
Yeah, it worked. And you kind of like it. Feels good, feels powerful. So I think some people, that's how, so they'll do it and it'll work. And they'll be like, yeah, I only need that little.
Yeah. And what's even worse is like when that's where you learned from someone, that's what you saw. And then you do it and you go, oh, it worked for me too. And all I have to be is treat people bad and be a jerk and yell. Yeah. And my subordinates will do what I tell them to do. And they will. Right? Mm-hmm. A subordinate will, if you bark at them and scream at them, they're going to do what you say at the moment. Mm-hmm. The problem is, what kind of team have you built? That's the problem.
Yeah.
What is that subordinate going to do when you're not there?
Yeah.
They're going to do everything they can to cut corners and really they don't care about you. They don't want to do a good job for you.
Yeah.
And so when you're not there, they're not going to do a good job for you.
Yeah.
So you get addicted to yelling and screaming, but it doesn't work in the broad sense of what you're trying to make happen.
Yeah. Slowly falling apart. Next question.